And next. Yeah, so now I'm pleased to introduce today's speaker, Juan Mavo-Navarro. Juan is an instructional designer with more than 20 years of experience. Drawing on his experience as an instructional designer, trainer, lecturer, and university professor, Juan has developed a holistic approach to engagement in teaching and learning, which applies in his professional practice. All right, then over to you, Juan.
Perfect. Thank you. Thank you. Can you hear me?
Yeah, I can hear you perfectly.
Perfect. Perfect. Thank you. Thank you, Emily, Jennifer, and the entire team at McGraw-Hill Canada for this kind invitation to share thoughts about cognitive load. I would like to say that as an instructional designer, I feel very passionate about this topic. And I consider it more important today than ever, with a number of courses that they used to be hosted in person and now they are switching to online or to a remote teaching fashion. So in this session, I will ask for your participation via chat, polls, and also our virtual parking lot that Jennifer already shared in the chat panel. Feel free to type questions and comments in that parking lot document. I will do a quick review at the end to address some of those items, time permitted, but I will comment on every single one on my own time, and then I will post a summary along with the recording of the session. So rest assured that your comments and questions, they will get addressed. So without further ado, let's just jump into the agenda. This is a session that I consider is going to take me 45 minutes to deliver, but since it is an interactive session, chances are you're going to have some opportunity to participate and we can engage in some conversations perhaps. So the presentation is structured in 3 sections. We'll discuss what information overload is and how it works. We'll discuss some theories and models just to set the basis for the conversation that will follow. And then we will discuss specific strategies to balance the cognitive load that can be applied while you are designing your online course or your teaching materials. Even if you are planning your class, the delivery of your live sessions, you're going to find these strategies really interesting. Finally, we are going to talk about a topic that is not necessarily related to cognitive load, but it could be beneficial if you consider it, which is balancing the workload in your course. It factors into the equation, and that is the reason why I added this section. So before we start, this is essentially the layout of our session. So before we start, I would like to ask you some questions just to set the tone for this conversation. Have you ever, and I'm going to show a poll for you if you allow me right now, have you ever attended a conference and at the end of the day you felt that you could not absorb more information? And you should be able to see right now our poll in there. This doesn't necessarily has to be a conference. I'm thinking about a conference because usually there are keynote sessions, there are concurrent sessions, and you can spend one full day essentially going from one talk to the next one, to the next one, to the next one. So have you ever felt at the end of the day that you could not absorb more information? Does this ring the bell? Maybe? Yes? No? Okay. We got a few answers here. I'm going to close the poll and I'm going to show you the results. As you can see in there, essentially the majority of our participants today have had that experience. You felt that you could not absorb more information. And this is a pretty overwhelming sensation. Let me tell you that is why conferences, they balance the delivery of the sessions with networking events, with opportunities to chill and to have side conversations, to not necessarily focus only in content delivery. So let me ask you another one. Have you ever taken notes when participating in a new learning experience? Can you see my poll in the session? You can start participating in there. Have you ever taken notes when participating in a new learning experience? And as you can see here, or I can see it on my end, the response is overwhelming positive. So this is something that essentially we all do. We all do. We do this. I will show you now. For some reason, it's taking like a few seconds to close. I am not sure why, but there you go. Those are the results. The majority of you take notes when participating in a new learning experience. And I'm going to explain to you why is that and how it is related to the cognitive load management. I have another one. Have you ever heard your students complaining about your course content being just too much? It's like, Juan, seriously, the content of your course is like too much. The content of this class is just too much for me. Obviously, you have to see this in a context. Many students, they are taking more than one course at the same time. And the thing is that I often say that taking a course at the university level or a college, it is supposed to be a very time-consuming activity, a very demanding activity. At the end of the day, you are learning new content, you are getting new skills. So it is supposed to be like that. But sometimes the students, they express this to us. And take a look at this. I'm just going to show you this, these poll results, so you can see that the majority of our participants have heard this. And let me tell you something. First of all, thank you for participating in my quick polls, because what I'm trying to see here, what I'm trying to put this in your radar, is that the management of cognitive load is really an issue. It happens all the time. And the thing we necessarily need to consider it when we are planning our courses. And hopefully the next slides that I'm going to present, they are going to guide you in that direction. And we are going to talk about what is information overload and how it works. What does it mean and how it works? So let's talk about, first of all, the ATKINSON-SHIFFRIN model. And please allow me to discuss a little bit of theory in this particular section of the presentation, so we can set the basis of the conversation that is going to come after. So the most widely accepted theory that explains how information is processed and made part of our internal repository of knowledge and skills is the ATKINSON-SHIFFRIN model. As you can see here, it is one of those models that was created 5 decades ago or something like that. And the thing is that it has received multiple revisions in time, but it is still a very valid model. It's a seminal model to really understand how we process information using 3 particular mechanisms. The first one of those is the sensory register, or essentially our senses, the way we perceive the world and capture information. Regardless to say that this is the mechanism that gets affected by physical disabilities and gets addressed by universal design for learning principles. So for instance, when you hear an instructional designer saying, you need to add alternate text descriptions to your images, they are just providing a secondary method to convey information, not just the visual. They are addressing a potential disability. And as you can imagine, designing your course in a way that doesn't address potential disabilities affects the efficiency of the sensory register for a person who has disabilities. Information is technically not stored in our senses, is passed to the second mechanism. And the second mechanism is what we call the short-term memory. The short-term memory receives and holds information that comes from the sensory register. And it also holds information that comes from the long-term memory, which is the third mechanism. The short-term memory is not infinite, it's finite, and is short-lived. We can only deal with a limited amount of information or cognitive load. And that is where the terror comes the first time. The amount of information that we can hold on the short-term memory is called cognitive load. At a time before we start losing it. And it happens all the time. If you have information that is stored in the short-term memory, eventually you will start losing it if it doesn't make the transition to the long-term memory. And this gets worse if the content that your course, your class, your webinar session is not presented in a well-organized manner that will facilitate the transfer of a long-term memory. If I might add in this particular point, think about that the information should be presented to the short-term memory in the form of a very well-curated storytelling piece. If you present the content in appropriate format, it makes easier for the short-term memory to start making those connections with the long-term memory and to save that knowledge and that new information that is being presented. At some point, the thing is that doesn't happen most of the time. Most probably, you don't recall many details of what you saw this morning when you woke up. If I ask you, what time was it? If I ask you, for instance, what pajamas were you wearing or were your family members wearing? Okay. If I ask you, when you check the temperature, how cold was it? How warm was it? Those type of details, they live in our short-term memory for a very short period of time, and they just disappear. But when we are in a formal pursuit of knowledge, that content stays in the short-term memory for a very short period of time, and we cannot afford to lose it. When we feel that this is too much for me to remember, we might default to what we call the quintessential cognitive offloading strategy. Do you know what the strategy I'm talking about? If you know it, you can put it in the chat panel. Do you know what is the quintessential cognitive offloading strategy? The one that we use to make sure that we don't forget all that information that we are seeing. You can put it in the chat panel if you want, but we address it at the beginning in one of our first questions. This strategy that we use for cognitive offloading is note-taking, and that is why we all use it. You take notes because we want to make sure that we will remember some important details of what we are receiving, and mostly because it is in our short-term memory, and we know that it's not going to hold, it's not going to stay in there. So the third mechanism that we are going to consider is the long-term memory. This is where the information from the short-term memory is received. It's held indefinitely and is organized in schemas for retrieval when prompted. So it is assumed to be limitless. So the long-term memory, it is supposed to be limitless. And in that sense, what you remember, and it accounts for the 100% of our permanent knowledge and skills. Like what you have, when you say, this is what I remember, this is what I keep on my memory, that is in the long-term memory. That long-term memory is the repository for the 100% of your permanent knowledge and skills. And I am talking about communication. I'm talking about language. I'm talking about how to drive. I'm talking about how to walk, how to dance. I'm talking about the specific skills like cooking or all those elements that you can imagine and you can remember clearly. That is your long-term memory. And here's the thing. Learning theories, they work in the interchange on the information between the long-term memory and the short-term memory. So when you listen about theories like constructivism, cognitivism, and you start diving into each of those theories, you're going to see essentially how to make the transition of content from the short-term memory to the long-term memory, how to make sure that individuals can organize that information, that content, in a way that they can retrieve it later. So in that sense, the goal of education is to help learners attain knowledge and skills beyond that instructional event. So education is hoping that our learners, they can keep that knowledge, they can develop those skills way beyond the class has ended, way beyond the event has ended. However, as you can imagine, any compromise in these first two mechanisms that we have here, not the first, I would say the first two, any compromise on the sensory register and the short-term memory, it will compromise learning itself. And that is usually, I would like to make a pause here, because that's what I usually tell instructors when I am talking about accessibility. When instructors tell me, for instance, Juan, why do I need to add alternate descriptions? Juan, why do I need PowerPoint slide decks that they are so simple and they don't have images? They have so bland colors, like they are so boring. Juan, why do I need to, I cannot use color coding? I always tell them the same explanation. It's like when you convey information in one single way, when you, for instance, don't take into account these elements, you are compromising learning for individuals that have some disabilities. You're compromising learning for them because you're compromising the sensory register. And I prefer to do that instead of saying, you know what, that is the law, at least here in Ontario. I prefer to say, this is the right thing to do, because we cannot compromise the sensory register. If we do it, unfortunately, we are going to compromise the entire system. So this is the model that usually explains what comes later here. And this is still a valid model, has been studied for a number of years, and recent research still taps on the Atkinson-Shiffrin model to explain how this mechanism occurs. But I would like to tap in other type of content that also explains how cognitive load affects our performance when it comes down to learn, right? So let's talk about, for instance, this particular evolutionary educational psychology chart that I am going to present. The reason I would say why some topics they come more natural than others might be behind this particular piece of information that I am about to present. Let me tell you something. First of all, learning is never a simple process. And you might be thinking about, for instance, that sometimes it's easier for you, for instance, to learn about some topics. It comes more natural, and others, you really struggle to get it. So why? Why is that? So the reason might be behind the relationship between what we call the biologically primary knowledge and skills and the biologically secondary knowledge and skills. So I'm going to consider it like two buckets. And the thing is, we are pursuing both. I would like to say that, especially if we are pursuing betterment. For us, we are always learning, but the pursuit of organized and structured learning, it means that we are pursuing betterment. We want to be better individuals. The first bucket is the one that you can see right now on a screen, is the primary knowledge and skills. It includes items that we are all familiar with and that are usually learned during our upbringing. Like when we are growing up, we learn these things that you can see on a screen. Things like problem solving, imitation, recognizing faces, communications in your native language, and social relations. Just because we belong to a social group, we learn to speak in our native language. So let's start by saying that. And we also learn how to solve relatively easy problems from a very early age. And this is, by the way, this is the reason why Malcolm Knowles, when he explained about the principles of adult learners, He mentioned that adult learners, they are all problem solvers. And they are problem solvers because they were trained from the beginning based on their membership in a particular group. Just because they were part of a family, they grow up developing those problem solving skills. And we learn also by imitating others and constructing meaning by interacting with other individuals. So these primary knowledge and skills are attained easily and effortlessly, I must say. So this happened whether you want it or not. Obviously, there might be situations that they will affect this knowledge acquisition, as you can imagine, but generally speaking, you don't need training to do these particular ones. You develop those on time. In a sense, these are domains, this looks like domains that they are easier to learn, right? If you think about if you're going to take a course and that course is going to talk about nonverbal communication, if that course is going to talk about, for instance, having difficult conversations, if that session that you're going to take, if you're going to take training about networking, so you're going to see that what is going to be presented to you, everything is going to sound logical. Everything is going to sound like makes sense. So it's just because you're not starting from zero. In any of those domains that I just mentioned, and as an example, okay, you are not starting from zero because you already have that as your primary knowledge and skills. So in that sense, if you think about that, that is something that we already master. What often gives us trouble is the second bucket. And I would say, I would like to change that is a poor choice of. It doesn't give us trouble. To some of us, it's exciting to learn something new. But the thing is that the secondary knowledge and skills, for learning them, we often require instruction or at least guidance. If we stop to think about this and we let it sink, we are talking about mostly everything that we learn outside general problem-solving strategies, communication, and social relations. This includes algebra, accounting. It includes social sciences. It includes creative, I would say creative knowledge. Pretty much everything. Yes, and obviously, as you can imagine, this includes precisely higher education. So, recognizing that these two sets of knowledge and skills, they exist, is key to understand why some topics really compromise the learner cognitive load. Chances are everything in the second bucket is new, and they might not be able to create those schemes in the long-term memory without assistance. And this is what is going to kick off our conversation for strategies. The chances that many of you taking part of this conversation today are working in a domain-specific field, it means that the content that you're presenting to your students might be considered a secondary knowledge or skills in that particular bucket. So in that sense, for your learners to get that in particular, they need guidance. They need to pursue it intentionally. Otherwise, they won't be able to get it. And we are going to dive into that in the specific strategies. But before going there, I want to present one more piece of theory. Before we jump into those strategies, I think it's important to think about these principles of human cognitive architecture. And I would say, rest assured, this is the last piece of theory that I am going to present today. But it's important because I would say the strategies are deeply rooted into these principles. So for instance, information stored in order to function for us as humans to function, the natural information processing systems require an enormous amount of information. Just think about all the process that takes for you to take intentional steps to go from your bed in your bedroom to the door of your house. If you start thinking about all the muscles that are involved, all the sense of direction, all the orientation that you need to take into consideration in order to walk those 20 steps to the door, you really need an enormous store of information. Now, just imagine that you are pursuing a PhD and just thinking about a highest degree that actually requires us to put into practice higher cognitive skills. So we need like a huge store of information. The long-term memory provides that store for primary and secondary knowledge in the case of human cognition. And please remember that the goal is to get knowledge and skills into the long-term memory. That is the whole goal of the learning process. So borrowing and reorganizing most of the information acquired and stored in the long-term memory is borrowed from the long-term memory of other people. And just always think this: the majority of you in this forum, you are instructors, you are teachers, you are professors, you work with teaching staff. But in the case of those who have a teaching function, you are letting your students borrow content, knowledge, skills from your long-term memory. And the thing is that we as human species, we are one of the few that actually have evolved to do that, to learn from others. So we imitate others, we listen what they say and read what they write. And once the information is acquired from others, it is reorganized by us using information that previously we had in our long-term memory. Reorganizing means creating meaning. And I will ask you, you can put it in the chat panel if you want. How many times have you said this when you hear something that is new to you? Have you heard yourself saying something like, okay, let me think this through and make sense of it? Have you said that to you? Like in private? Okay, I am listening to this. This is totally new. I need to think this through and try to make sense of it before I can give an answer. So that is you trying to say, okay, this is the new information I am receiving. I am comparing with what I know, with information that I already learned, and I have an opinion created, and I am trying to see how these two connect. I can see here someone writing to me, yes, absolutely. Definitely on occasions, need time to process. Yes, it happens to us. It happens to us, and actually, I encourage us to do that. We are not just recipients of content. We are not empty vessels. We need to listen to new information and we need to exercise critical thinking. And critical thinking is creating meaning, is applying this principle in its true form. Then you have randomness as genesis. Let me tell you something. If we are unable to obtain the needed information from others, then we need to use our primary skills to generate information of selves during problem solving. Let's put it this way. You are giving a number of math problems, but you have never seen a solved problem. Your brain is going to start working, trying to retrieve from the long-term memory something that will allow you to solve that problem. Chances are that you might eventually do it if you have at least some principles that you learned before, or you might need to reach out to someone. But the thing is that in the absence of sources that they allow us to borrow the required information, we need to start generating problem-solving moves and test them for their effectiveness. Essentially, we need to try and err and learn from the error and then try again. And that is a noble endeavor, I have to say, but we need to ask ourselves, are we giving our learners the space and feedback required for them to generate the heuristics that they are required to solve new problems? More importantly, were you given the time and feedback to figure out a new problem by yourself when you were learning this particular subject? You can answer in the chat panel if you want, but this is mostly a reflection. It's like for each of us, if we are teaching a course, then probably we master that content long time ago. And the thing is, when we were trying to solve problems in our personal domain, were we given the time to practice the solutions of those problems on our own, to figure out the problem by ourselves, or we require or we receive guidance to do it? If the answer is the second, then I think it's just to say that we own our students that exactly. We need to provide them with time so they can test their answers, and they can try and they can determine if the solution functions in that particular scenario. The one that I really like, and this absolutely related to cognitive load, is the narrow limits of changes. Again, remember that the short-term memory, it is limited. It can only hold certain amount of information. And its main problem is that it can only deal with a certain amount of new information. So those limits, they actually impact learning. There is a some point, and I would like us to recognize this. And by the way, I'm totally open. If you have a different opinion, you can put it in the chat panel if you want. You can put it in the parking lot. But the thing is, at some point, we contribute to overloading our learners, their capacity for absorbing new information, because we are giving them too much new information. And the thing is, new information isolated, it might be simple to retain. But when you have two pieces of new information and you need to learn each of them individually, but you also need to learn the relation between the two of them, the thing gets complicated. I'd like to provide an oversimplified example, and I'm going to test your knowledge of the French language. And I would like, please, your answers in the chat panel for this. Can someone tell me what is the French word for car? What is the French word for car? Someone wrote here auto. I am not sure if it is auto. I think there is automobile or something. But there is another word I'm looking for. What is the French word for car? Voiture. That is the word I was looking for. And I'm going to tell you why. Yeah, it is voiture. That was easy. If you think about this, when you learn vocabulary is simple. You just memorize what is the equivalent to car in the French language. Now, would you say le voiture? Yes or no? Would you say le voiture if you're going to add that indeterminate article in there at the beginning? Would you say le voiture? No. Beverly's saying la voiture. There you go, la voiture. It is important. It is important here. So, voiture is a feminine noun in French. So, the appropriate word that you're going to use is la voiture. Now, what about the color? Would you say la verte voiture? Yes or no? La verte voiture? Because the car is green? There you go. Beverly saying no. Why no? La voiture verte. Exactly. That is the way you put it. Adjectives in French are often placed after the noun, not before. So, would you say, for instance, la voiture verte? And probably you would say no, because it is actually verte. It actually has to end on E, the adjective. Green has to end on E, because the adjective changes when the noun is a feminine noun. So it has to be la voiture verte. So have you noticed all the new information I'm introducing here to a new learner, for instance? I am not only talking about vocabulary. I am not talking about just like indeterminate, I'm not talking about adjectives. I'm not talking about only those elements. I'm making them everything together in one single lesson. Well, it often takes more than one class to learn all these of these pieces, just so you know. But the thing is, when are we limiting the changes of new information that we are introducing at any given time? Many French instructors, they know this. They know that you cannot throw all these elements in one single lesson for a student. They take them in stages. And the reason is the narrowed limits of changes. You can only enter a certain amount of new information at any given time. Otherwise, it becomes overwhelming. Otherwise, you cannot make the connections and really understand why the adjectives change and the position is important. The last principle, by the way, thank you. Thank you for all those who indulge me with participating in this quick exercise of the narrowed limits of change. Environmental organizing and linking signals those are signals from the environment that they trigger the transfer of appropriate information from the long-term memory to the working memory. That information can be used to generate action appropriate to the environment. So in short, are you using content that triggers the recall of previous learned knowledge and skills? Are you providing attention-grabbing activities, for instance? Setting the tone, and this is something that we learned from Robert Gagné in his seminal model of the moments of instructions, that we need to set the tone. We need to set the conditions to ensure that learning occurs. And the thing is, those conditions, things like, for instance, attention-grabbing activities, something that sets the tone for students to understand, to start learning, those are important. Those are that they trigger the transfer of appropriate information from the long-term memory to the working memory. And that happens when you provide those attention-grabbing activities, when you give them opportunities for practice, when you challenge them to participate in class. When you do that, you are fully using this particular principle. I think I have given you some things to think about today, but I would say let's see how these translate into the strategies that you can apply to your online courses and that you can also apply, for instance, to any class that you are delivering. I'm really rooting for every one of you, especially if you feel like your in-class setting is your preferred choice. So I'm really rooting for you that we can get back to teaching in class at some point. But the thing is, let's talk about the strategies to balancing the cognitive load. So the first one that I am going to tell you is that we need to regulate exposure to novel information. And this comes down to narrow limits of change. My first recommendation would be use a taxonomy of content in your course. Think about, in your course, you might have required contents. If your course uses a required book, that is your required content right out of the get-go. So they are strictly related to the learning outcomes, and they are usually featured in class, in the assessments in your course. But then you have suggested content. They are still related to the learning outcomes, but the assessment, they might not necessarily cover them. And then you have the optional contents. They respond to the learn more about this area premise, and they don't necessarily align with the learning outcomes. If you ask me, when I am working with a new instructor who is teaching, for instance, online, and he says, I have all these sort of links, websites, articles that I want to provide to the students, I ask that instructor, okay, let's start sorting this out. And I ask the instructor one by one, this particular resource, is it required, suggested, or optional? Oh no, Juan, it is required. Okay, tell me which learning outcome this is related to. And if I don't see the direct relationship, I challenge that instructor to keep it out of the required list. And it comes moving down, down, down. And if you ask me, at some point, I try to remove the optional contents completely out of the equation. Because it includes, generally speaking, more information that is not necessarily related to the learning outcomes. And for keen students, they will try to hit every single title in one of these categories. And you know what is going to happen? It's too much new information. Many of them, they're going to feel overwhelmed and nothing is going to pass to the long-term memory. Obviously, generalizing is not necessarily fair, but I've seen this many times, many opportunities, and literature supports our findings. We need to use the taxonomy in a very smart way. You can also think about sequencing. Do you remember what I mentioned before? That the content, the best way to present the content is to follow a very elaborated and curated, I would say, storytelling piece. I'm talking about this. When we are sequencing the content, and by the way, this is appropriate if this is your choice. I know that some of you are following the structure of a particular book. But if you have the opportunity, if you feel that you can make changes in the way you introduce the content, you might use one of these strategies. The most important thing, keep it consistent. You can use general to specific. You can use simple to complex. You can use a time sequence. You can use known to unknown. You can use problem solution. Problem solution is my favorite. Again, adult learners, they are problem solvers. And this taps into a primary biological knowledge or a skill, which is solving problems. It gives a person the satisfaction. The person is already equipped to solve a problem. If you follow, for instance, a case study, a guided exploration of a case study, and that is the way you are sequencing the content, you can ask students at certain points for their input, and you will see that they are solving the problem with you. Because we are all natural problem solvers. Then you have clustering. And I would like to stop a minute here. Clustering means breaking down content into smaller and smaller parts. In the technical term is clustering. The informal term is chunking. And if you, for instance, if you're working in the e-learning space, you may have heard the word micro-learning. It's essentially what we are talking about here. Clustering makes the instruction manageable for learners and help them to organize the instructional intent with more clarity. It means that instead of presenting large lectures, instead of presenting large blocks of content, you will chunk them in small pieces, something that they can see today in the morning, and they can feel the satisfaction that they completed that. And then they move to the next one, and they completed that, and they move to the other one, and they completed that. A good example that many people relate to is, for instance, one of the best books that I have seen about structuring content. It is called Everybody Writes. Everybody Writes by Anne Handley. Does it ring the bell? Have you ever heard about that book? Just curious if you have heard about Everybody Writes by Anne Handley. So that book, for instance, that is an amazing book, Alicia, by the way. It is super easy to read because each of the chapters, and the book has 100 chapters or something, each chapter is like 2 pages. And it's directly to the point, like how to write better, how to write content that is better, that is simpler, that can be read easily. That is one of the best examples that I have ever seen of chunking in a particular, in a book. Books are famous, especially textbooks at the university level are famous for having long chapters that sometimes the students, they cannot tackle in one single sitting. But in generally speaking, chunking means that you're going to turn a 30-minute video lecture in 10 minutes chunks. So students can take them in 3 chunks of that lecture. Divide a 50 pages chapter in 10 pages segments. Instead of having a 1.5 hour e-learning program, you can divide them in smaller lessons. The idea here is to put those elements in chunks, so it's easier for students to take them like pills and it will take them I would say the same amount of time, but you are essentially dividing it for them. The long-term memory sharing, it is one of the best examples, or I would say not the best examples, that is the best rationale that I can think about for doing group work. Obviously, most of us, we have students and we promote group work, and we tell students that that mirrors workplace reality. That when they are going to work in an organization, they're going to be working with a group, with a team of individuals. And that is totally true. That is absolutely fine. But the thing is that sometimes the students, they often react against that situation because these are ad hoc groups. They know that they are not going to be working with these individuals any longer. They don't necessarily share the same goals. They don't belong to the same department. So it is particularly difficult to make it palatable for students. What I do know is that when you work in groups, they actually allow for sharing long-term memory. And that is the best justification that I can find for group work. In that sense, let's talk about long-term memory sharing. First of all, reflect on your own learning journey about a topic and explain how you learn it. I think this is super important because this is going to make you connect with your old novel learner in that particular subject that you are teaching. How did you understand this particular topic at some point? Try to think aloud. Try to verbalize your thinking process when you are completing a task. If you can document it, I've seen, for instance, instructors that they develop a problem in financial accounting and they write boxes just to articulate what they are thinking when they are solving a problem. That is long-term memory sharing. And in these particular times of Zoom, WebEx, and any other tool that you might be using, Microsoft Teams, for instance, that you might be using to connect with other individuals, you might have heard that these tools, they have breakout groups, breakout rooms. Well, they are meant for students to meet, discuss something, and then come with a result to the larger session. Well, that is the type of long-term memory sharing that you might be tapping to. As learners to work in individual exploration, for instance, before they join a breakout rooms, then they can share with others. They can share their understanding. I want to be really clear about this. If you ask students, okay, you guys four, you're gonna meet in this breakout room and you're gonna answer these 3 questions, and the 3 questions, they target the specific concepts, for instance, you're gonna have valuable knowledge there, but that doesn't necessarily mean that they are gonna be sharing the long-term memory. When you ask students to share their understanding of a particular topic, question, or a particular concept, there you are targeting long-term memory sharing. So keep that in mind as another activity that you can apply. You can use the solve problem approach. When you are presenting students with new problems, try to expose them as well to solve problems, to illustrate what is the heuristics that they can apply to solve those problems in this domain-specific content. And then provide opportunities for practice in a safe learning environment. This is critical. The opportunities for practice. If you think about, we explored in one of our principles that it is incredibly valuable to give students the opportunity to practice, to fail, and then to learn from there in a safe learning environment. And there is where you play that vital role, because you should provide feedback. What you did right, well, how can this be improved, and how you can improve. So those are the elements that they are going to help in the terms of the solve problem approach. All these strategies, by the way, they are designed to work with those principles of human cognition architecture. but more importantly, they are designed to balance the workload, when the cognitive load. When you do it in this way, you're going to see results almost immediately. You're going to see that students are going to start responding better to assessments. They are going to start participating more, and they are going to have more meaningful questions, which is a clear symptom that something is happening. Finally, always bring relevancy to your content. Performance content is critical for learning, especially when many of us know that there is an increased gap between what learners are learning at the university and what they are experiencing in their workplaces, the first job that they take. You might have seen, for instance, in your particular field, that the gap is not that big, but in other fields it's huge. And the reason is that sometimes we are preparing learners for a workplace, and we don't necessarily provide a glimpse on that performance context where they are going to put them to practice the content and knowledge that we are presenting to them. So it's important that you present that context. And there are a couple of reasons for that. The first one is that adults, they are most interested in learning subjects that they have immediate relevance to their job or their personal lives. It is very difficult to tell students, like, you need to learn this because eventually you're going to use it. That principle that Steve Jobs mentioned in that commencement speech in Stanford, like 10, 15 years ago, or it was a graduation speech, I don't recall exactly, but he said, like, you cannot connect the dots looking forward. You connect them looking backwards. You need to trust that the knowledge that you are getting is going to be useful in the future. That is a tough sell, I must say. And we are all adults. We need to provide that particular relevance so our learners can see that this is going to be valuable. Motivation is really important for transition of content between the short-term memory and the long-term memory storage. So those are my strategies. Before we leave today, and we are almost at the top of the hour, I just want to mention that the workload in our course is not necessarily related to the cognitive load management. Cognitive load management can be addressed by the items that I already mentioned. Share your long-term memory, allow students to share their long-term memory, what they already have in a store, work with a taxonomy of content, cluster your content, use the problem-solve approach for presenting new content. So all those strategies. But the thing is, the workload in your course might work against all those strategies that you can apply. The goal of this section is to bring awareness. And I'm going to use it with an example. I'm going to explain it with an example. Let's say that you have this course. This is an 8-week course. And I put dates in there so you can see it more clearly, or you can picture it in the space and time. So you have 8 weeks of content, and in each week of content, you have readings, you have pre-recorded lectures. I'm thinking about online, by the way. Then let's say that you have assignments. You have a few assignments there. You have assignment 1, assignment 2, assignment 3. They are spaced out. This might be exams, for instance, as well. But I'm thinking about assignments. Also, this might be formative or summative. This might be low stakes. This might be ungraded. This might be high stakes. And then you're going to add into the equation activities. Let's say discussions, students attending office hours, students doing some journaling exercises. So that might happen in there. And then let's say that you have webinars. Let's say that you have synchronous webinars like this one that I am having right now. Let's say that you have one every week. You can see this, that is getting complicated. And the thing is that all those sort of activities, they might compromise knowledge acquisition. Even if you are doing everything right in terms of strategies to balance the cognitive load, probably students won't have time, because all these activities, they consume a lot of time. And I always thinking about students that are taking more than one course. in any given term. So ensure that all activities, in terms of balancing, ensure that all activities, they align with learning outcomes and give them some time to complete it. And from that point of view, I always say, present your activities from the very beginning of the term, so students know exactly what they are going to, what they can calculate the time that they are going to invest. Also, use the webinars for highly interactive activities and record your sessions, especially if you have learners that they are in different time zones. In the times right before the assignments, try to reduce the workload. Make sure to give students time to complete those assignments. And finally, then use your notepad and start counting hours. Use your best exercise. How many hours students have to put on every single week? And try to see the full picture. That is the best way to balance the workload in your course. If you do this and you also put into practice the strategies that we mentioned before to balance the cognitive load, then you're going to see that your students, they are going to start working better. They are going to start learning more. More importantly, they are going to start asking the right questions. And with that, I will finalize my session today. I think I pretty much ran out of time. I think it's a lot of information to present, but I will be open to your questions. I think we have our parking lot. I don't think we have questions in the parking lot, but I will be open to any questions that you would like to ask. And thank you. Thank you for taking the time to listen to me talk about this particular topic.
All right. So thank you, Juan, and thank you, everyone. Our session got a little longer than expected, but it was great to see awesome engagement today. So we've captured all the questions you asked in the parking lot throughout the session, and we'll share the FAQ with you in a follow-up email along with a webinar recording and the post-survey link. So before you go, I would like to remind that McGraw-Hill is here for you. So at the moment, we are facing so many unknowns. As a trusted partner, we would like to help you with building your course online. So please reach out to us if you need any help with your online course. All right, I'll wrap up today's webinar for now. So see you at the next webinar. Thank you so much.
Thank you, everyone. Thank you. I will follow up on those questions. I will share the details of that book. And I really appreciate the invitation again, Emily, Jennifer, and McGraw-Hill Canada. Thank you, everyone, for joining. Have a good day.